Hello, warriors. I am so excited to bring this show to you. Today, I got to talk with a woman named Brenda. As someone myself, Susie, I'm talking, who's still recovering from narcissistic abuse, Brenda just brings a wealth of knowledge and compassion to this topic that I really, really appreciate. Brenda Stephens, the guest, MS, LPCC, is a group practice owner in San Diego, California, where she and her colleagues provide individual and group therapy to those who've been impacted by a relationship with a narcissist. Brenda uses a thorough understanding of PTSD and complex PTSD, along with EMDR and Parts Work, which we had an episode on earlier this summer, so you might be familiar with that. And she helps clients understand and recovering from the lasting complications of being in a relationship with a narcissist. She provides training to other therapists to expand their knowledge and understanding of narcissistic abuse, which is uniquely insidious and cruel. I will agree with that. Brenda helps clients heal from the abuse they've endured and teaches them how to love themselves, reclaim their identities, and create healthy relationships. I hope you get as much value out of this as I did, whether you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you've been in a relationship with a narcissist in the past, or you know someone who is in a relationship with a narcissist. This episode and interview will bring great value to you. Hello and welcome to the Love Your Life show, Brenda. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm so grateful to be here.
I am so glad you're here for so many reasons. And one of the big ones is that you really are an expertise in narcissism and recovery from narcissist relationships. And while that is a term that's thrown around a lot, and I can't wait to dig into your body of knowledge, I would love to hear how you got into this work.
The way probably most of us do. It's so funny. I tell this story so often that I feel like I'm a broken record. So I apologize if your listeners have heard this before, but it really was just from my own experience. I have a parent who's a narcissist. I have an ex who, the father of my children, who is malignant narcissist. And it was funny. I mean, he and I have not been together for a very long time. My children are in their 30s. So thankfully, I'm mostly out of that part of my life and away from him. But it was really funny early on. I work mostly with women, and that's mostly because women come to therapy a lot more than men do. But I would have these women coming into my office telling me about their relationships. And I kept thinking, they're all dating my ex. They're all telling me the same story, the same experience, and over time, I just kind of put two and two together, that it's a shared personality disorder that they're describing. And the rest is kind of history, as they say. It's just been kind of niching down into doing the work with that population. Survivors of narcissistic abuse is what I call myself. And it just kind of went from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled that you're doing the work. To give us and the listeners sort of an overview of maybe what some of those red flags were that you were hearing, that you're like, are they, dating my ex? Or, and how would you define narcissism or a narcissist?
Oh boy, that's a big question. There's so much information out there. People are looking on to social media to get answers to this question. But I will tell you, the first part of what you just asked me is, what were the red flags that were happening with people coming into my office? Literally, the phrase I heard over and over and over again, to the point that it's on our website to kind of get the attention of people who are coming or thinking this way, is, I feel like I'm going crazy. Because
I was going to say, am I going crazy? Is something
that's it.
Myself. Yeah,
that's it. It is a common feeling, I think, for everyone who's in a relationship with a narcissist, because your world gets turned upside down. You're constantly told what you believe is not true. What you've witnessed with your own eyes or heard with your own ears is not true. And you have somebody who's such a master, that's a good word, a master manipulator, convincing you that you are perceiving things incorrectly. So you start to feel like you're kind of losing your mind and you don't know which way's up. So I think that feeling of manipulation and the self-doubt that comes with it, and I think there's some little voice inside of us that says there's something about this, it's not right. Even though we may not know what it is, we know that something's off.
Yeah, it's that confusion, I think,
Mm,
came up for me, like,
mm,
sort of feeling so confused in a conversation, like, what is happening? Or, I heard you also say, like, when you're sort of in an argument and you're so far off track that you're like, "I don't even remember how this started," but you're like,
yes,
sort of like I call it like being in the weeds. Like we started here and then suddenly we're arguing about, the paint color. Like, what?
exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It gets and well, there's a lot of terminology used in the population of survivors of narcissistic abuse, and word salad is one of them. And I
Mm.
think it's
Oh,
not the like clinical version of probably what therapists were taught in school, what word salad is, but it really is sort of what you just described. A narcissist will kind of take you off track, kind of throw a bunch of nonsensical how did I get here? What are we talking about? You
mm.
know.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that before, but I've definitely heard, like, felt that the word salad. Um, so that's interesting because one thing you said there right before I interrupted was you said there could be something in us that feels a little confused or a little like this isn't right. And yet that isn't that wasn't really my experience because I was raised with a narcissistic parent. So do you see this pattern? I mean, you said you had a narcissistic parent, went into a marriage, and that is my experience.
Yes.
Um, how or why do we do that?
That I get asked that a lot, honestly, and it's so incredibly common. And I always want to let people know this wasn't their fault, right? What we know better when we do better, first of all, but we don't know what we don't know also.
Yeah.
And when we were raised that this is the way a person behaves, and when it's our parent, we don't know any better, and that is what is normal to us. So when we go out into the world as young adults or late adolescent looking for partnership with other people, we are attracted to what's familiar, and this is common no matter whether it's a good or a harmful attraction, right? This is just how we partner up with people. Unfortunately for us, we have been shown this way of behavior that isn't healthy for us, and then we go out and find it in partners later on in life, and it all feels normal until it doesn't, right? At some point something starts to click for us, and we start to say, wait, this feels terrible all the time. It's not good for me. And we start to pay attention to maybe those little voices we're hearing, or those little messages in our body with the tension and the anxiety that most of us feel most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely was my experience. And thinking of, like, I didn't know what I didn't know. I really appreciate that you're saying that. Like, what felt comfortable to me was incredible dysfunction and, listening to sort of manipulation and thinking that
Absolutely.
I'm wrong and all of that. And that's where that's why I love having people with you on the show, because that's some of what I have thought about is like I was like a fish swimming in a fishbowl of like polluted water, and I don't
Ah,
know the water's polluted until someone puts me in a new bowl and I'm like, this feels so good. What's going on?
oh,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful analogy. I love that.
Mm,
That's it. You just don't know how polluted your water is until
mhm.
you start to see a bigger world for yourself or a different fishbowl. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I don't know, one thing that happened for me, and I know it happens for other people, but this like um this controlling aspect of secrecy, and like there were many rules for me in my marriage, but there also
Yep.
was like a lot of secrecy in my home growing up. Like, we don't talk about, your dad having a anger spell, or
Yep.
my ex was like, don't talk to, we don't go out with those people. There were just a lot of rules. Is that common, or what do you see around that?
I think it's incredibly common. And I think it is for control and manipulation, right? The narcissist's biggest goal is to not let anybody see their mask slip. They don't want anybody to see the scared, vulnerable, well, they're not vulnerable, that's not the right word, but the scared kind of shame person underneath that mask. So they're wearing this mask constantly of, look at me, this is the person that I really am, when it's not. And if they get a whiff, a little hint that somebody is seeing them for who they really are, they will shut it down. And what you just said, like perhaps it's friends of the family or something like that, they know that they're being kind of identified, for lack of a better word. They can't have it. They can't tolerate. A narcissist cannot tolerate being seen for the shame-filled person that they typically all are. So that's why they will push other people out of their life, your life and their life, but they will also want to isolate their victim, honestly, is what it is. They want to have complete control over their partner and their children, most likely. And that comes with a lot of rules too. You don't tell the secrets of the family. You don't share any weaknesses. And it keeps them in control and in power, which is what they need.
Well, and I like pointing that out to listeners, that like, if there are a lot of rules or secrecy, that could be another red flag, because that is definitely something there were rules. I mean, I was a grown woman and I was given rules of like, I can't buy these books, or I can't, go talk to those people or wear certain clothes. And there was, and so this is something I'd like to talk about too, is this, I just remember like my ex, because we had 3 kids together, and we'd be sitting out maybe with another couple. We didn't do that often, or somewhere we'd be out, or like talking on the side of a soccer field, and I could tell, I was so attuned to his emotions that like his jaw would get tight, that all he would have to do is sort of like look at me in that, and it was like I needed to like somehow fix whatever one of my sons was saying. Or okay, so
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's like this like jaw twitch. And I'm like, oh my goodness, which then now leads me into very like high attunement with other people's feelings.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there. If only you had 10 hours. Right. But I think that's a big part of it. And I hear people talk a lot about, a lot of us identify ourselves as being highly sensitive people. And I hear a lot of talk about highly sensitive people being attracted to narcissists. And I don't necessarily believe that. I don't think that we're like destined to be together. I think what happens, this is just anecdotally my perception, is that most of us who partner with a narcissist as a couple, in a couple relationship as an adult, have come from narcissistic families. So this is what we know. Because we come from narcissistic families, we've learned exactly what you just said. We know what the crinkle of an eye or a certain sigh or a means, right? We know all of that, and we're so attuned to it. So we are very sensitive. I don't know if we were born that way, or if we learned to be that way, or if it's a little bit of both. But I think what you described is very common for all of us. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say this, and I know this was true for my narcissist. His eyes, when the shame would overcome him and he would just be in one of his dark places and would rage, I swear his eyes turned a darker shade of brown. I'm sure that doesn't really happen scientifically, but there was just something about that I knew it was coming. It would be before any bad behavior, but it was like a foretelling of what was going to happen. Yeah.
Well, and that's when we, our nervous systems get into that more like animal like reaction, where it literally, and I do appreciate you saying that, like the highly sensitive person, I think I just was conditioned to that. Like that was the fish water I was in, that I needed to be so highly attuned to what my dad's moods were, that then, I was totally, normalized to this life where it's like, oh, right, my husband squeezes his jaw. Well, then I better make sure the kids shut their mouths. That really interesting place that affects us sort of to our core. You've said before that narcissists or narcissism can seek into our nooks and crannies. Could you speak a little more about that?
Oh yeah. So I've used this analogy before, because there's this movie called Venom, and I don't know if people are familiar with it, but he has like this black oil, or I don't know what it is. It's like it almost looks like plant roots that just seep into other people or other things. And to me, that is like the perfect analogy of what happens in our nooks and crannies. They just seep into every little part, things that you wouldn't even think about, how you, like any little thing, like how you dress for the day can be influenced by, well, what are they going to think? What are they going to say about, these shoes that I've chosen? It can be so benign, but can be a problem for them. And we don't really realize how every aspect of our life, even time that we're away from them, is still heavily influenced by their control and their behavior, because we just carry it with us. We've been under control to such a degree that it just stays with us, and we almost give them more power in our minds than they actually have, which is ideal for them.
Right. For sure. And I guess I just want listeners to hear that with like a big dose of compassion for when they are
Yes.
feeling this like heaviness, or am I crazy, or am I, like, it literally seeps into your core.
It does.
And to just, I mean, the first step is that awareness. For me, at least, it was that like awareness that this is happening, that this is sort of my nervous system reacting, or
Yes.
my old conditioning, and just a release there.
Yeah.
I want to back up a bit, because you speak of 3 different types of narcissists. Could you speak a little more about that? I know that
Certainly.
on Instagram there are like 1,700 types of narcissists.
At least, at least. To me, I mean, I think you could probably subcategorize 1,700 different types.
Right.
To me, there are 3 really main types. You've got covert, overt, and I would say kind of communal, right? Some people, there's another term for it I can't think of right now, but communal is the one that I always use. Overt is malignant. Overt is somebody that you textbook would think would be a narcissist. They're loud, they're attention grabbing, they have to be in the spotlight all the time. They will do whatever it takes to get attention. That's pretty commonly what we think of as a narcissist. And I'm going to jump over to communal, because covert is the most complicated one. Communal can be someone, and honestly, I think my ex was all 3, and I think they really can
Interesting.
be.
Okay.
Yeah. He was a fireman for a long time, so that was a perfect platform for him to be on. That, here he's the hero and he's doing all these great things for people. But he would volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. And never, ever did he do that humbly. Right? It was always posted all over social media. Look what I'm doing. Or the firemen do the little thing where they stand on the corner with a fireman's boot,
Right.
and they collect money. I mean, that was always publicized for him personally. And granted, I would think that any kind of giving organization is going to publicize any fundraising, but for him, it was only about him. Look what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So, and that's just one example. I've had a remarkable number of people who have been raised by clergy, which I'm not saying clergy are narcissists. I'm saying the folks that have narcissistic parents who were clergy members, I see them as communal narcissists too, because they're putting on this kind of show for the audience, basically. And it doesn't look the same at home, when they go home
like
to
the
their
intent
children.
is not. Yeah, so I have an example. My dad would take my boys, so his grandsons, like out to breakfast. And I remember one of my sons came home once and he's like Grandpa, it's not like Grandpa even wants to be with me, but he wants everyone to know that he's with me.
Exactly.
It's that like, look, here I am, like I'm here with the foot, like the boot, collecting money, and I'm here helping the community, and I'm here being a good grandpa.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's it. It's for the show. And now with social media, it's for the pictures, right? It's for how we can get attention for what we did. I can jump into covert narcissists, and that one's tricky. So a covert narcissist, and I think this one gets a lot of attention these days. It didn't used to, but they're hard to spot. They can look really vulnerable. They can look self-deprecating. It's not what you would expect as from a narcissist, as narcissistic behavior. I have so many examples swimming in my head, but basically they will do like a humble brag. They will try to paint themselves as the victim, which again is not what you would typically consider when you're thinking about narcissism, because they're going to make themselves look like the victim quite a bit in order to get the attention. And those are kind of the key differences with a covert narcissist. They're not, song and dance trying to get attention. They're covertly under the table, sneakily trying to kind of insidiously get it into your whole life, your whole everything, your emotion system, everything, to get control. But they do it in a very sneaky, underhanded way.
So everyone feels sorry for them.
Everyone feels sorry for them. They are,
Right,
yeah, they're
yeah.
never wrong. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So how, I mean, first of all, like when you have that sort of covert narcissism, it really can make you feel crazy because on the outside, it's like, what's the problem? Like everything's so nice. And oh, here's this crazy person asking to go to therapy because she must be messed up or, so how
Yes.
do you encourage people to start moving away or to start, like if they notice that they're in these relationships, how do you start sort of protecting yourself?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I mean, these are abusive relationships and safety comes first. Sometimes, you know, I think anyone in an abusive relationship, the abuser is capable of violence, and you want to make sure that that's something that you consider, that you're not going to get yourself in more danger by trying to leave. But it's not always possible for people to leave either. And a lot of times what's happening too is, this is, so this has been coming up in our support group a lot lately. We've got some people, kind of middle-aged people, that are dealing with narcissistic parents who are aging. So in those circumstances, or when you share children with a narcissist, you can't necessarily walk away. Right. So you have to do whatever you can do to protect yourself, and your specialty with boundaries is
Yeah.
absolutely essential. And one thing, I put this, I think I put it in my first book. It may have been both books because it's really important. I hope I put it in both books, but it's really, really, really important for people to recognize that boundaries are not for the narcissist. They're for you. You have the boundary there to protect yourself. Your consequence or your condition of that boundary is that you will remove yourself from the situation, hanging up the phone, walking into another room, whatever you have to do. That is your boundary. And I just want everyone to feel empowered that even though this other person in your life may feel like they have so much control, and they try to assert that, you do have some power. What you have too is something that they cannot live without, which is your supply of attention. That is what they want. And they're not, we don't want to instigate anything, obviously, but we do want to protect ourselves. And the way we can do that is by stepping back, by enforcing the boundary, by withholding, arguments, or in getting into kind of the weeds, like getting into the weeds with them. We just want to shut it down. And there's a term often used with narcissistic abuse survivors have a whole lexicon. We've got a whole thing on our website somewhere, I think on our website, that has all of these terms. One term is called gray rocking. Have you heard of that?
I have used it. I use it all the time. Yes.
It is an incredibly powerful and simple thing. You just kind of, like I said, you just kind of shut it down. But the way that term developed is that you're as dull as a gray rock, right? You're not giving them any fuel for their fire. Basically, you're just kind of there, maybe a little yes, no, but you're just kind of purposely with intention, not reacting and not buying into whatever they're trying to sell.
100%. And yeah, and it works. I have to say, and yet, something you said something about like, sometimes you can't leave, like if you have kids with him. And that was when I started to recognize like, wow, the water I'm swimming in is pretty polluted, and start to take shifts out. I did need the state I lived in, Virginia. You needed to live like I couldn't leave. If I left with the kids, I'd be accused of kidnapping. If I left without them, I'd be accused of abandonment. So I would lose my rights. So I needed to stay in the house for a bit. And that gray rocking and setting boundaries was definitely, were tools I was trying to work with. And I just want to highlight again, your work and my work and that one of the main things that helped me was the support. Like, so when I couldn't change my circumstance, to know and to have other voices. And actually for me, it was podcasts. My ex didn't know that podcasts existed. So I started listening to podcasts. And so it was just this sort of like, you're not crazy. And to get some of that reinforcement in my head, because that's where the power lies, in beginning to practice the gray rocking or the boundaries in the way that you speak of. And I do too. I say a boundary is a guideline for how you'll be treated. So it's like, if you keep yelling at me, I'm going to leave the room. If you've been in, 26-year relationship and then you were raised, like that feels really scary. So to have the support of you or your group or your books, to know that like, you're not doing the wrong thing. Like you can leave the room. You
Mhm.
can, and that's where, like, we have to start somewhere. But I really appreciate.
You're right. We have to start somewhere. And I think I want to really underscore what you just said. That can feel incredibly scary. Am I allowed to leave the room? Can I actually walk into the bathroom? Can I, whatever? It
Mhm.
feels really scary, but the first time you do it is the hardest time. And then
Yeah.
the next time it's a little bit easier. And it feels so empowering, even though it may on the outside look like such a small thing to just walk in the bathroom, to lie and say, I have to use the bathroom,
Mhm.
just to get away. But that's where it starts. And one other thing, the validation that you are not alone it is essential as well. I cannot stress that enough. I think this kind of abuse is so incredible. All abuse is isolating. This is isolating in a different way because you also are almost abusing yourself because you're believing the lies, right? And
Mm.
that's not to say we're doing anything wrong, that we're complicit in this. But what happens with narcissistic abuse is that we start to believe the lies. So we don't know to even look for a way out or to look for the validation or support until we just can't take it anymore. But
Mm.
now things are trickling in. Like this didn't used to be a thing where podcasts were talking about this, that it was all over social media. So people were very isolated and really, really quite literally, I think, thinking they were losing their minds, like we
Yeah.
talked about in the beginning. So
Yes.
the validation and the support, any support you can get from somebody else, just so that you can kind of keep your touch with reality versus the reality of the narcissist paints, I think is incredibly important too.
Oh, it's so important. And it's like, that is the difference, because it is it I appreciate how you say it's like it is sort of that self-abuse too, because for people who were sort of raised in a narcissistic household, I mean, often, and I you can speak to this a little more, but like in that narcissist household, my non-narcissistic parent was consistently making excuses for the behavior and making me wrong, being
Oh
like,
yeah.
you hadn't been so noisy, or you hadn't done this, or you hadn't done that. And so then you go into your, young adulthood thinking you're still wrong and it must be me. So the first time you walk away and say, I'm not going to be yelled at, I'm going to go into the bathroom. Like, I literally remember I was like sweating, like it was just this like, oh God, is this okay? Like, and I didn't even say something like a boundary script. I
Mhm.
said exactly what you said, which reminded me, like, I just said, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, which was not abnormal to me having delivered 3 kids. But it was that,
Right.
like, I knew I was stopping the conversation and going in the bathroom. And that was like the only way I could set a boundary. And my body
Yes.
was just like, is this okay? So it's really,
Yes.
yeah.
I have to tell you, and I've spoken about this probably too many times too. I have not yet had one person come to me that does not have some sort of digestive issue.
Mm.
Our bodies take the toll of
Mhm.
this abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, like any of those diagnoses. And that's one of the things, is that, like, if you're in a relationship and you start to notice things are off, or you're like, something's wrong, but you just,
Mhm.
sometimes I hear people say, like, I'm going to stay in it for the kids.
Oh
And
yeah.
I often will, I'm just like, do what you need to do. Like, I support you no matter what, but I encourage you to not do that, because
Yeah.
first of all, they've tested kids' urine, and the urine, they can see that there's stress in the kids. But
Yes.
also, if we shove it down, that's when the diagnoses come for us of the,
Absolutely.
like, greater, I mean, it definitely, the body keeps the score
Mm.
and all of that. I really
Oh, for
appreciate,
sure.
yeah, it's really hard. Um, so what do you say to the listener who is like, but I've tried to set boundaries with a narcissist and they don't listen, or they don't agree with me?
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Well, and that's pretty common, and that's why I've written about it, is that we're so used to being under the control of the narcissist that we do think that they have all the power, and we have to, hopefully we can. I think for our own sanity, we have to start to take little risks on where we can exert our power, and our power is with boundaries. And I know that sounds probably like I'm talking about it too much, but
No.
I cannot stress how important that is. It is the key if you have to stay in a relationship with a narcissist, and you can't go no contact, which is ideal. That is the ideal way to handle the relationship, is have them gone from your life completely. the next best thing is the strongest boundaries that you can possibly have with them. And that takes practice. It takes trial and error, you know, and it takes stepping up to the plate every time that you need to enforce a boundary. You know, sometimes you're going to strike out. It's not and none of us are perfect, and it's scary. It's hard to do, but you'll find that most narcissists are cowards. They really are. Underneath it all, they're cowards. And when you start to stand up for yourself, you're going to get a lot of pushback. And this is common whenever we're trying to extinguish any kind of behavior with any mammal. You know, the behavior will increase a bit before before it's gone completely. But ultimately, if you kind of stand your ground, you will find that these boundaries will make a difference. And the difference it makes for you is you. And the empowerment that feels is life-changing. It makes everything that the narcissist does less tolerable, and that grows too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is, I guess, for listeners to just not discount this, that it really can be something, it's just like a little bit of a mindset shift. I can remember saying to myself, just because he says it doesn't mean it's true. Like he would be talking and talking, and I would just try to like go to my safe place in my head and be like, just because he says it doesn't mean it's true, or just because she says it doesn't mean it's true. And it is just that, like, just trying to put that little seed of doubt in our heads when we've been, you know, really trained all along to think we're the wrong ones. But it's like, well,
absolutely,
maybe not. And then also to the point of boundaries, I absolutely agree that the strong boundaries are really what's needed. And for me, I found that I needed to get clear on also the internal boundaries, that we don't, because narcissists can be scary, and we don't always have to say them out loud. Like, so one thing I did is when I was able to move out of the house with my kids, I, in my mind, set a boundary that I would not reply to any texts within, I think I just said 12 hours at the time. Like I couldn't even say a day, but it was that, like, I didn't tell him that, but just for myself, it's like, you get a text, you know, there are certain ways to mute texts from certain people. And so I was able to do that. And then I would check because if I was answering every text that came in, it was like a ping to my nervous system every time. I think we actually had written into the divorce contract that there would be no phone calls unless there was like an ER visit, or like we got very specific because
you have to.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing that sometimes, again, if you don't have the validation, you're like, am I crazy? Am I being like overly, you know, rigid? And it's like, absolutely not, because they are like that slime that if you leave a little bit, even now, you know, you said that your kids are in your 30s, my kids are all, like, I just had the last one leave the house, but even now, like if I leave a little window, it's that narcissistic supply. He senses that, and it'll just like start. It's amazing to me. It's almost like a game now. And I can only say that because I'm removed enough, but it's like, wow, look at that. Like I wasn't completely closed with my door, and now they're like 13 texts all about how wrong I am and how bad of a mom I, you know, it's like,
oh my gosh. Yes.
There they are. Right. Yeah.
Oh, that strikes such a chord with me too. I mean, I've been in that exact same situation. And oftentimes after my kids got of age, you know, and were older, he would still try to kind of, I think of it as fishing, you know, throwing the bait in the water. He would try to get me to take the bait by saying something about the kids, even when they were adults, already in adulthood. You know, so there's no stone left unturned for them to try to get your attention and get you back into that cycle of being their supply.
Yes.
It's everything to them.
Yeah. So I guess I just like when dealing with narcissists, like there are certain like when you're still in the relationship, maybe living in the house, or it's a sibling, or you're in a marriage with one, to start using some of these boundaries to speak up for yourself and get some ease. You just sort of need space in your head.
You do.
Yeah.
I wanted to go.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to go back to what you said about just being in your head and giving that little mantra to yourself, right?
Yeah.
I often say something very similar to what you said is, I'm not going to believe the lies that he's telling me, or the lies that my parents have told me, or whatever, you know, whoever your narcissist is, I am not going to tell myself those same lies. This is my truth. And I think any kind of mantra that you can do for that, to just sort of keep you grounded and in in reality and not falling down that rabbit hole, I think it's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly helpful. And I think exactly to the point, because like when we're in that sort of, like you mentioned, all mammals sort of do this, or we're in that fight, flight, or freeze, like literally, I would feel like I totally was disassociated. Like my body would just, I was different and I was just in this situation. I would repeat that. And it just was like a soothing, like just because he says it doesn't mean it's true. And I wouldn't necessarily change anything externally, but it was like I would just sort of hold myself there. So I guess that's what, like, I'm sort of leaning towards, like, we have these 3 different stages. Like you're in it still. What can you do to support yourself? Get a mantra, something you can tell yourself, recognize you're not crazy, start to, read your books and listen to podcasts. When you're moving out of it, I like also having a phrase, like one thing that helped me, because some of it, that engagement, it's that like needing that narcissistic supply. One thing that helped me, my go-to there was, maybe you're right. And you like, what the hell? Because I'm also, in saying that, like it just drove him, because he's like, of course I'm right and you're wrong. But sometimes when I said it's like, I like thinking of like a tug of war. And in order to have debate, like both people have to be pulling. And if I just drop the rope, and it's like, so that was one thing that helped. Or on the other side, one thing that helped me while I was still in it was just saying, I've changed my mind. He was like, you can't friggin' do that. But it's this like this, like either, so just when you're in it, trying to think of something that just takes the escalation and the making down to zero. What would you say about that?
So I think that is brilliant, to everything that you just described. When you're still in it and when you're kind of walking on the other side, trying to get out, is don't engage. There's never going to be any point, and I swear this is a lesson that I am still learning with my parent, but don't engage. It is not going to go anywhere. It's going to get your blood pressure up, and there's just no point. You're not, if you engage and you can be as right ever was, they will never give into that. They may know it, they will never verbalize that, they will never give into it. So to keep your own peace, I would say just don't engage in anything. And that kind of goes back to gray rocking too. But you can, like, just saying, yeah, you're right. Right. It may make you cringe inside to do it, but I promise you it's worth it.
And I don't say you're right. I say, maybe you're right.
Maybe you're right. Yes.
I just was like, because if I say you're right, then that would come back to me in 2 years and be like, well, remember that time? And then that's when I said, well, I changed my mind. And he's like, what the, but that, I like that a lot. Like the not engaging, not defending. I always say, like, the less words, the better. Cause the more words you give, it's like the more opportunities you're giving that narcissist to like click in and take that and
completely. Completely. I don't ever get a chance to talk about this part, but they think of them like a data bank. They are taking it all in, and they were going to pull every little bit of it out at some point or another in the future to use against you. So the less you give them, the better off you will be, for sure. And they don't forget anything. I mean, at least in my experience, I mean, there's just, mine would talk about things that had happened before my kids were born. And it's like, it was 35 years ago. It doesn't matter anymore.
Right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, it's like that, but you said that you'd stay married to me forever. It's like, yes, I did. And I've changed my mind. Like,
but so my mind.
That is, I mean, that's where I don't want to skate over this. Like when people are in the middle of it, it is hard to get to that other side where you don't engage. Cause sometimes certainly if they're in the middle of a legal battle, but also if they're in the middle of, just sort of figuring out where the boundaries lie, it's hard to get to that other side.
It really is.
And when you're on the other side, it's that do not engage, do not, defend, explain. That's what I got into, is like this over explaining, thinking that somehow maybe they would agree down the line.
I think we've all done. Yes. Yeah. I think we have all done or do that currently.
They'll see it my way. And it's just that expectation. I guess, could you speak to that a bit? Because you've spoken about sometimes with narcissistic relationships, we need to grieve grieve the relationship that, never was, or.
And that's so complicated. It is. And it's so incredibly important. But I think the other thing the first part of what you just asked is, I call this cognitive dissonance. And again, I don't know why I always have to have this caveat. It's not the true clinical term of what cognitive dissonance is in narcissistic relationships. The way I see it is that we look through the lens through which we see the world, right? We have a certain way, especially if we do identify as highly sensitive, we are very attuned to other people. We feel the pain of other people, that kind of thing. We assume that other people feel the same way. That's just our automatic go-to. So when a narcissist does something that's totally out of, our realm of what we would do, we try to reason that, we try to tell ourselves a story that makes sense. And then we try to understand them. We need to give up on that. We are not going to understand them. They are not viewing the world through the same lens that we are, or that most people are. They're viewing things in a very different way, and they're usually clearly the star of their own show and the victim of their own story. They are always going to be the victim, and they're not going to be taking accountability. Oh my gosh, I think I just spaced on the other part of that.
Well, I'll bring you back in a second, but that's another mantra that I like, is this, like, they think differently than me.
Yes.
Is one, because otherwise I get into, like, let me explain all the reasons why it's, logical that whatever it is. And it's just this, like, stop, close your mouth. They think differently than me. They think differently than me. I was asking you about grief. And how
I just remembered.
how there's this piece of, like, wanting the relationship to be different than it is, or
well, I think what happens for a lot of us is what you described in the beginning too, is that we were raised by a narcissist. We didn't realize it. Then we get into a relationship with a narcissist, and then super lucky ones of us have spent 30 years with them without realizing what was going on. And then we're looking back going, oh my gosh, my whole life was a lie. Right. And that is really hard to swallow. And when people are in the process of getting out of the relationship, when they touch on this grief and looking back, everything I thought was real wasn't. Who wants to walk through that? Most people don't, right? So this is a really risky time, kind of in the recovery process of getting out of these relationships, or the moving forward process, is walking through that very, very painful part of accepting, yes, none of this is what we thought or hoped it was. And I can't stress this enough, how important the grieving process is here, and what a stumbling block it is. And that if you bump up against it and you go back into the relationship, that doesn't mean you can't try again. Right. It's so scary to walk through, and maybe it's going to take 5 times or 10 times, but when you walk through it and get to the other side, you will be so happy that you did. It is the most freedom and the most probably normal you will ever feel.
For sure. And also with the grief, I just want to touch on this, like, yes, we have to get through it, and sort of, like, that's where I think when we've been raised with narcissists, we can be very mean to ourselves. Like, why didn't I see this? It's like, you didn't see it.
Yes.
And that's okay. And we just move forward and have compassion. The other part where I think we get into trouble, I've gotten into trouble, and I see clients get into trouble, is when we are comparing either with other people who are divorced and co-parenting and hosting a birthday party together, for God's sakes, or we look at, like, Disney, and we're like, why wasn't my dad like this? So this sort of, like, comparing. And then in our optimistic, open-hearted minds being like, oh, well, maybe this time it'll be different, or this. I've gotten I just recently sent an email to my dad because he was trying to reach out, because I think it would look good to him if he was back in touch with me. And I said, okay, well, how do you address these 3 things? And he's like, I'd do the exact same thing. And he went into this long thing. And I was like, God, there I was caught again, like, thinking that, like, oh, maybe this time he'll be the Disney dad. And that's where grief shows up for me. It's just this acceptance of, my dad's never going to be like that. And my ex and I are never going to, like, he's not the one for me to get together with and be like, oh my God, wasn't that neat seeing so-and-so's first day picture? Like, that's not the person for me. And we can just support groups. And
that's really, all of what you just described is really hard to swallow. And I think especially when it's a parent who's a narcissist, it can be even harder because you look back on your whole childhood that you thought was normal, and it can come in waves, and it can come over so many years where you're like, oh, wait a minute, other families don't do that. Or, oh, wait a minute, that was really messed up what my mom said to me or my dad said to me, right? Or that, you know, that comparison, I see that happen all the time too, especially with when someone's had a parent with that was narcissistic, like, you know, just that longing and that hope that your parent will still show up for you in some way, and accepting that that just won't happen. It wasn't ever going to be able to happen because they just don't have the capacity. They don't have the ability to show up the way we would want a parent to show up.
Yeah, and I think, yes, overall, I guess it's just what I want listeners to get and to like reach out to you and to lean on me is this self-compassion piece.
Yes.
Because certainly with a parent who is a narcissist, society does not understand that. I get a lot for empathy in my divorce. It's this, you know, okay, now that doesn't mean like all our a lot of our old friends believed, because he was a covert narcissist, so believe that I like they bought into that victim story, and that's fine. But with a parent, and what you're talking about, sort of now aged parents, it is not something in society where people look at the child and they're like, oh, right, you have a right to set boundaries and maybe not visit your parent every day. So just lean on some support, because
Yes.
there is abuse there, emotional and verbal abuse for sure. If you sort of trick yourself back into that Disney mode of like, you know, either they're different or I should somehow be different as a daughter. Is that?
Oh gosh, yes. I hear that a lot too. Like, well, it's my mom, or, oh, it's my dad. You know, I have to do this or I have to do that. You don't. You really don't. I mean, and I always tell my clients too that, you know, you show up in the way that is authentic to you. You don't do it because society tells you that you have to be this obedient child to your parent. If you choose to show up, you do it because it aligns with your values, not because it's an expectation of somebody else. The control and the decision and the choice is yours. It's not for somebody else to make, because no one else has walked in your shoes. And it's easy for people to say, well, that's your mom, you need to do this or you need to do that, but they're not the one that's going to continue under the abuse, or, you know, all of the stuff
They
that
just
it
don't
brings up.
understand. That's where it's just like they're like, but that's your mom. They grew up in a different fishbowl. So,
Yes.
so it's like, of course,
Yeah.
they are thinking, why wouldn't, and it's like that, but that's not, yes, she's my mom. And like, that's just, again, with listeners, it's like when I get into that defense, it can make us feel crazy and not.
Yes.
So I like what you said, like lining it up with the values and expectations. I also want to put in there, because I have gotten burnt a little that in this expectation that it's like the societal expectations of what's expected, you know, for a kid, but also my own expectations of maybe they've changed, or maybe, and sort of looking still for that, like, it's like the little girl in me is looking for that hit again from of like, okay, now can I get that approval? And it's just stop. Like at some point you stop going to that hot burner and trying to touch it.
Oh my gosh, so well put. Absolutely. At some point, and it's really hard for most of us, I think, because we all crave that. We all want to be accepted and approved of by our parents, but we have to recognize, we really have to do, and this is where the grief comes in, that they are not capable of doing that, right? They just can't. And I think another thing to do, especially when we're kind of getting on the other side of it, or even when we're in the midst of it, most narcissists have stopped their emotional development at a very young age. And I talk about this a lot, but I think it's a really powerful tool for us to use. When you can put an age on their behavior, you know, and this often comes out in their rage. Narcissists all have these moments of rage where they, you know, their mask falls off. They've been seen for who they are. All of their tools that they work to kind of control their own shame, none of them work. They will rage. They'll fly into these rages. And that's typically when we can most directly kind of put an age on the rage. There are probably other moments too that we can see an emotional response to something and say, well, that's a really childlike response. But to me, that's a really helpful tool for us to use when they're using all their tricks on us. You know, that's an 8-year-old. That's an 8-year-old right there trying to convince me that I'm a worthless human being, right? So how much, you know, if we look at it as an angry little 8-year-old who doesn't have the emotional IQ or emotional quotient, whatever, to kind of, you know, work through all of their emotion, and we realize they're just throwing their own issues at us, I think it can take the sting out a little. It doesn't.
I mean, yeah, I really like, I haven't heard that, put an age on the rage, because if an 8-year-old is spewing and crazy at me, I'm not going to dive into, I'm not going to be like, let me tell you about why I'm not going to dive into the explaining or the engaging, or even taking it personally. It's like, and that's where I've gotten freedom with a lot of my relationships. It's just like, this isn't about me. They're doing this because of their own wounding. And yeah, I'm gonna practice that, putting an age on the rage. Well, thank you, Brenda. You have given us some like wonderful help and tips and support, and that really is just so needed in any of the stages where we are in these relationships. Can you tell listeners where they can find you or get support from you, or
Absolutely. So the easiest way is we have a website. I'm not very good on this website. It's www.narctrauma.com. We haven't been as active on that one because most of our stuff is on my therapy website. It's stevenstherapy.com, and it's STEPHENS therapy.com. There's a plethora of information there. There's podcasts, there's blogs, things there. I think the thing I love the most about the work that we do at my practice is our survivors of narcissistic abuse support group. We call it SONA. We do it every Thursday. Everyone is welcome. We, you know, people just come in and kind of get the support and validation that they need. They tell their stories. We do it from 1 p.m. to 2:15 p.m. Pacific time every Thursday. So, and on Zoom. Yeah.
Oh,
so
wonderful. I will put that in the show notes, because that really is, that's where I just really encourage people to start, is in the community. Like certainly reading your books, I'll put those websites in the show notes, but like just poking around there. It's getting out of the fishbowl, recognizing that you're not crazy. And then I love that you have a support group that people can drop into. And your books. Did I mention your book? So yes, you have a workbook. I love workbooks. I love getting into it. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. I am so grateful for the work you do, and that you.
Oh, thank you. Right back at you.
Yay. Thank you.